After catching his wife cheating, a billionaire CEO proposed an army girl and broke the internet. Julian Vale's peaceful morning shattered as his phone erupted with notifications, buzzing against the marble kitchen counter like an angry hornet. He reached for his coffee, his hand trembling slightly as the first image filled his screen. His wife, Charlotte, wrapped in an intimate embrace with another man outside a hotel in Paris. His stomach lurched. The timestamp showed yesterday afternoon, when she was supposed to be at a charity board meeting. The television, which had been humming quietly in the background with market updates, suddenly shifted to breaking entertainment news. Julian's coffee cup clattered against the counter as his own name flashed across the screen in bold letters. Tech billionaire Julian Vale's wife caught in scandalous affair, the anchor announced, her voice seeming to echo through the empty penthouse. More photos appeared, Charlotte laughing over dinner, holding hands across a table, sneaking through hotel lobbies. Each new image felt like a physical blow. "This can't be happening," he whispered, his voice rough. The penthouse, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, suddenly felt suffocating. Morning sunlight streamed in, catching the wedding photo on the wall, their happy faces a cruel reminder of what he'd thought they had. His phone rang, then rang again, and again. Names of board members, shareholders, and his PR team flashed across the screen. Julian ignored them all, his eyes fixed on the television as more details emerged. The man was identified as Philippe Rousseau, a French art dealer Charlotte had met through her gallery work. Another buzz, this time from his assistant. Emergency board meeting called for 11 a.m., stock already down 3% in pre-market trading. Julian's hands clenched into fists. He'd built his tech empire from nothing, weathered countless storms, but this betrayal struck at his core. The world was finding out about his crumbling marriage through social media and gossip sites, while he stood alone in his kitchen, still in his pajamas. His phone buzzed again. Charlotte. Her message read, "I can explain. Please answer." Delete. Julian walked to his home office, each step feeling heavier than the last. His laptop showed dozens of unread emails, most with subject lines containing urgent or crisis. The stock ticker in the corner of his screen showed the bleeding numbers, now down 5%. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out the manila envelope his lawyer had prepared weeks ago. He wasn't blind. He'd sensed something was wrong. The late nights, the distant behavior, the sudden trips to Europe. He just hadn't wanted to believe it. The divorce papers felt heavy in his hands. Each page represented another crack in the life he'd built. His lawyer had urged him to wait, to think it through. But seeing those photos, watching his private pain become public spectacle, there was no going back. Julian's hand was steady as he signed each page. The morning sun cast long shadows across his desk as he worked through the document. His phone continued its relentless buzzing. Board members, reporters, friends, family. The TV in the background now showed financial analysts speculating about the impact on Vale Technology's future. Down 7%. He reached the final page just as his assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Mr. Vale, the board is assembling in the conference room. They're requesting your immediate presence." Julian signed the last page with a flourish, his signature as bold and confident as ever. He slipped the papers back into the envelope, stood up, and straightened his tie. The man in the office window's reflection looked older than he had just hours ago, but his jaw was set with determination. The stock ticker flashed red, minus 8.2%. The glass-walled boardroom on the 48th floor of Vale Technology's headquarters buzzed with tense energy. 14 pairs of eyes fixed on Julian as he took his seat at the head of the table, his expression carefully neutral despite the morning's events. "Let's address the elephant in the room," Gavin Rourke spoke first, his silver hair catching the afternoon light. As head of the executive committee, he carried significant influence. The market's reaction has been severe. We're down 12% and falling. Julian nodded, his fingers pressed against the cool glass surface of the conference table. I understand the concern. I've already instructed our PR team to prepare a statement. With all due respect, Gavin interrupted, his tone anything but respectful. This goes beyond PR. The stability of leadership is paramount to shareholder confidence. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. And right now, that stability is in question. Several board members shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs. Martha Chen, usually Julian's strongest ally, wouldn't meet his eyes. My personal life has no bearing on my ability to lead this company, Julian stated firmly. Gavin leaned forward, his carefully pressed suit wrinkling slightly. Does it not? Your wife's indiscretions are plastered across every news outlet. Our phones are ringing off the hook with concerned investors. The timing couldn't be worse, with the Jensen merger negotiations next week. Julian felt the trap being laid, piece by piece. Gavin had opposed the Jensen merger from the start, arguing it was too aggressive a move. The personal crisis you're facing, Gavin continued, his voice dripping with false sympathy, naturally raises questions about your judgment. Perhaps a temporary step back would be prudent, allow you time to sort things out? The suggestion hung in the air like poison gas. Julian noticed several heads nodding slightly, board members he'd thought were loyal supporters. I've weathered personal challenges before, Julian responded, his voice steady. The company has always come first. But never anything this public, Gavin pressed. Never anything that threatened shareholder value so directly. He slid a tablet across the table, displaying the day's catastrophic stock performance. The board has a fiduciary responsibility to consider all options. The meeting dragged on for 2 more hours, each minute feeling like a careful orchestration of his removal. By the time Julian returned to his penthouse, the setting sun cast long shadows across the marble floors. Moving through the empty rooms, Julian gathered cardboard boxes from the storage closet. Each step felt heavy as he began the task of packing Charlotte's belongings. Her cashmere sweaters still smelled of her perfume. A half-empty bottle of her favorite wine stood on the kitchen counter, lipstick stains on the rim. As he worked, the day's events clicked into place like pieces of a sinister puzzle. Charlotte's sudden trips to Paris had started shortly after Gavin began opposing the Jensen merger. The photos had leaked just days before the crucial negotiations. Julian picked up a framed photo from their vacation in Santorini last summer. Charlotte's smile now seemed practiced, artificial. He dropped it into a box, the glass cracking slightly. His phone buzzed with another message from the board secretary. An emergency vote had been scheduled for the end of the week. The subject: leadership transition discussion. In the master bedroom, Julian found Charlotte's favorite earrings on the dresser. She never traveled without them, yet they'd been left behind before this last trip to Paris, almost as if she'd known she wouldn't be coming back to collect them herself. The Veterans Logistics Support Gala sparkled with its usual polish, but Julian felt disconnected from the practiced smiles and tinkling champagne glasses. He stood near a marble pillar, watching the crowd through eyes that hadn't slept in 36 hours. Mr. Vale, they're ready for the donor recognition, his assistant whispered, appearing at his elbow. Julian nodded and straightened his tie. This annual gala had been Charlotte's project. She'd cultivated the connections, arranged the partnerships. Now he stood alone, feeling the weight of curious glances and whispered conversations. The ballroom of the Grand Meridian Hotel glowed with soft lighting, American flags draped tastefully between crystal chandeliers. Julian made his way through the crowd, accepting handshakes with practiced automation. His company's donation to veteran support services required his presence, but every interaction felt like sandpaper on raw skin. "If we could have everyone's attention," the MC announced, tapping his glass. "We'd like to recognize our major contributors." Julian took his place in line with the other donors, his face a careful mask. The flashing cameras reminded him too much of yesterday's media frenzy. He focused on his breathing, on keeping his shoulders straight. After the ceremony, he retreated to the refreshment table, seeking a moment's peace. The elaborate spread of hors d'oeuvres held no appeal, but he picked up a glass of water, needing something to do with his hands. "The spanakopita is actually quite good," a quiet voice said beside him, "though I admit I'm partial to anything with spinach." Julian turned to find a woman in dress uniform, an army officer with captain's bars. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, her manner direct but gentle. "Captain Mara Reyes," she introduced herself with a small smile. "Logistics Command." "Julian Vale," he replied, though she undoubtedly knew who he was. Her lack of reaction to his name was refreshing. "I know the food at these events can be hit or miss," she continued, selecting a piece of the pastry she'd recommended. "But the kitchen staff here takes pride in their work. It shows in the details." There was something steadying about her presence. No agenda, no pressing curiosity about his personal life. Just a simple observation about food made with care. "You sound like you speak from experience," Julian found himself saying. 3 years coordinating supply chains through this region," she nodded. "You learn to appreciate the people who take pride in their work, whether they're cooking meals or moving medical supplies." Her words carried the weight of someone who understood real responsibility. Not the kind that came with stock prices and board votes, but the kind where people's lives hung in the balance. "That must be challenging work," Julian said, actually interested despite himself. "It has its moments," Mara replied, "but there's satisfaction in knowing you're part of something larger than yourself, that your work matters, even if it's not always visible." Her humility was genuine, her focus entirely on the mission rather than personal glory. Julian felt his guard lowering slightly, drawn into the simple honesty of the conversation. "Sometimes the invisible work matters most," he said quietly. "Yes," she agreed, meeting his eyes with understanding. "Sometimes it does." For the first time in 2 days, Julian felt his shoulders relax slightly. Here was someone who understood duty without drama, service without spectacle. The contrast to his recent experiences was stark and somehow comforting. Mara sat across from Julian in his office, her posture military straight, but her expression concerned. The wall of windows behind his desk showed the city sprawling below, clouds gathering on the horizon. Julian had called her that morning, asking to meet about a sensitive matter of mutual benefit. "I appreciate you coming," Julian said, his fingers drumming briefly on his desk before he stilled them. "What I'm about to propose will sound unusual, but I ask that you hear me out completely." Mara nodded, her dark eyes watchful. "Of course." Julian stood and paced to the window, gathering his thoughts. "My company is under attack. The scandal with my wife, it wasn't random. It was orchestrated by people who want to take control of Vale Industries." "The timing of the photos," Mara said thoughtfully. "They waited until the merger negotiations." "Exactly." Julian turned back to face her. "The board is using my divorce as grounds for removal, citing moral instability. But if I were engaged to someone of impeccable character—" He let the implications hang in the air. Mara's eyebrows rose slightly. "You're suggesting a false engagement." "A temporary arrangement," Julian corrected, returning to his chair. 6 months, perhaps a year, long enough to secure the company and expose those behind this plot. You would be compensated generously, and your veteran support programs would receive substantial funding. "Money isn't the issue," Mara said quietly. She folded her hands in her lap, thinking. Why me? Because you're genuine, Julian answered immediately. Your service record is exemplary. Your character is beyond reproach, and... He hesitated. You seemed to understand something about duty yesterday, about doing necessary things with dignity. Mara was silent for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. I need to be clear about something, she finally said. I won't participate in deception. If we do this, we tell no direct lies. We simply agree to explore a relationship with marriage as a possibility. Julian leaned forward. That's acceptable. And there must be boundaries, she continued firmly. Clear ones. This would be a partnership of mutual respect and support, nothing more. My faith is important to me. I won't compromise my principles. I understand, Julian nodded. We would maintain separate residences, appear together at necessary functions, present a united front to the board and the public. More importantly, Mara said, we would need to trust each other. Complete honesty about the situation and our actions. No surprises, no hidden agendas. Agreed. Julian met her steady gaze. You have my word. Mara stood and walked to the window, looking out at the gathering storm. This isn't just about saving your company, is it? She asked softly. It's about justice, about not letting corruption win. Yes, Julian admitted. These people, they don't care who they hurt. They see people as pieces to be moved around a board. They need to be stopped. Turning back to face him, Mara's expression was resolute. Then I agree. Not for money or publicity, but because it's the right thing to do. We'll face this with truth and dignity. Julian felt something tight in his chest ease slightly. He stood and extended his hand. Partners? Mara shook it firmly. Partners, under God's guidance and with clear consciences. Camera flashes erupted like lightning in the packed hotel conference room. Julian stood at the podium, his posture straight and unwavering despite the chaos of the past 48 hours. Reporters jostled for position, their faces eager for fresh scandal. Thank you all for coming, Julian began, his voice steady. As you're aware, recent events have put both my personal life and Vail Industries in the spotlight. Today, I want to address these matters directly. The room fell silent, pens poised over notepads. Julian adjusted his tie, a small gesture that betrayed his inner tension. First, I am announcing that my divorce from Carolyn Vail has been filed. While I wish her well, our marriage has ended. He paused, letting the words settle. However, life has a way of bringing unexpected blessings, even in our darkest moments. Mara stood quietly at the side of the stage, her army-trained composure evident in her straight spine and calm demeanor. She wore a simple navy blazer and pencil skirt, her dark hair pulled back neatly. She looked nothing like the society women who usually graced these events, and that was precisely the point. Yesterday, I had the privilege of speaking with someone who reminded me what integrity and service truly mean, Julian continued. He turned slightly, extending his hand. Major Mara Reyes, would you please join me? Mara walked forward with measured steps, her heels clicking softly on the hardwood stage. Camera flashes intensified as she took her place beside Julian. Major Reyes has dedicated her life to serving others, first in the Army, and now through her work with veteran support programs. Julian's voice softened as he turned to face her. In our brief time together, she has shown me what real strength of character looks like. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as Julian took Mara's hand. Mara, you represent everything I aspire to be. Honest, principled, and dedicated to making a difference. Would you do me the honor of accepting this ring and exploring a future together? He produced a simple but elegant diamond ring. Mara's eyes widened slightly. They hadn't discussed this detail. But she recovered quickly, remembering their agreement about truth. "Julian," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the microphone, "I accept your ring and your proposal to explore this relationship together, with honesty and respect." The carefully worded response went unnoticed by the press, who erupted in questions as Julian slipped the ring onto her finger. Their hands remained clasped as they faced the cameras. Later that night, Mara knelt beside her bed in her modest apartment, the evening news still playing softly in the background. The ring felt heavy on her finger as she folded her hands in prayer. "Dear Lord," she whispered, "guide me through this challenge. Help me remain true to your path while helping Julian fight this injustice. Give me the strength to be a light in this darkness." On her small television, financial analysts were reporting that Vail Industries' stock had stabilized after its sharp decline. News tickers scrolled with headlines about the whirlwind romance and "Military hero captures CEO's heart." Mara took a deep breath, her prayer continuing in the quiet room. "Help me remember that truth matters more than appearance, and that your purpose can work through unexpected means. Grant me wisdom to navigate this path with grace and integrity." She opened her eyes, looking at the ring that now symbolized their unusual partnership. The weight of what they'd begun settled around her shoulders like a heavy cloak. But as she rose from her knees, her resolve was firm. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with faith and dignity. Dr. Sarah Chen's office felt warm and welcoming, with soft morning light filtering through gauzy curtains. The leather chairs creaked as Julian and Mara sat down, a careful distance between them. A potted peace lily bloomed in the corner, its white flowers bright against dark leaves. "Thank you for seeing us on such short notice," Julian said, his suit jacket draped over the chair arm. He looked tired, the events of the past few days etched in the shadows under his eyes. Dr. Chen smiled, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she opened a fresh notepad. "It's not often I counsel an engaged couple before they've even had a first date. But given the circumstances, I think it's wise." Mara sat with perfect posture, her hands folded in her lap. "We want to establish clear boundaries," she said. "This arrangement needs structure." "Let's start with the basics," Dr. Chen suggested. "What are your non-negotiables?" "No lies," Mara said immediately. "Not to each other, not to the public. We can be selective about what we share, but everything we say must be true." Julian nodded. "Agreed. And no manipulation, of each other or this situation. We're partners in this, not pawns." "Doctor." Chen made notes, her pen scratching quietly. "And the timeline?" 6 months, Julian stated. "That gives the board time to settle and the company to stabilize. After that, we can announce an amicable parting of ways." "What about living arrangements?" Dr. Chen asked. "Separate residences," Mara answered. "We'll be seen together at appropriate events, but maintain our individual spaces." They spent the next hour detailing everything from public appearances to personal boundaries. Dr. Chen helped them craft clear guidelines for their unusual arrangement. Later that evening, Mara sat in Julian's penthouse living room, surrounded by newspaper clippings and digital archives. The city lights twinkled beyond floor-to-ceiling windows as she reviewed coverage of Caroline's alleged affair. "Something's not adding up," she murmured, spreading photos across the glass coffee table. Julian looked up from his laptop. "What do you mean?" Mara pointed to a photo of Caroline supposedly entering a hotel. "The timestamp on this is 2:15 p.m. on Tuesday. But look at her outfit in this other photo, supposedly from the same day at 2:30 p.m. She laid another clipping beside it. "Complete different clothes, different location. That's impossible." Julian moved closer, frowning at the evidence. "Could be different days?" "No, these were all part of the same batch released to the press." Mara pulled up the original news story on her tablet. And look at this. The metadata on some of these photos doesn't match the dates reported. She stood up, pacing as she thought. These discrepancies. They're subtle enough that most people wouldn't notice, but they're definitely there. Julian's expression darkened as he studied the photos. Are you saying these were deliberately manufactured? I'm saying someone went to a lot of trouble to make these look real. Mara gathered more articles, laying them out chronologically. The question is, why would anyone go to such lengths to fake evidence of an affair? The room fell quiet as they both stared at the scattered evidence of Julian's shattered marriage, the truth of it suddenly less certain than it had seemed just days before. The morning sun streamed through the dusty blinds of Mara's base office, casting striped shadows across her desk. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago, forgotten as she dove deeper into analyzing the leaked messages that had destroyed Julian's marriage. Lieutenant Cooper knocked on her open door. Major Reyes, the quarterly logistics reports are ready for your review. Thank you. Put them on the corner desk, Mara said absently, her eyes fixed on her computer screen. She had pulled up side-by-side comparisons of the leaked text messages, examining them with the same attention to detail she used for supply chain analyses. Something wasn't right. The timestamps on the messages showed irregular patterns, gaps that didn't match normal human conversation rhythms. She grabbed a notepad and started mapping out the time sequences. This makes no sense, she muttered, drawing connection lines between dates and times. The metadata showed messages sent at precise 3-minute intervals, too perfect to be natural. Real conversations had organic pauses, irregular timing. These looked programmed. Mara pulled up another window, examining the data trails of the leaked photos. Her eyes narrowed as she noticed similar patterns. The GPS coordinates embedded in several images showed impossible travel times, as if Caroline had been in 2 places at once. She reached for her phone, then stopped. Her hand hovered over it as she considered the implications. If she was right, someone had orchestrated an elaborate deception. But why? And more importantly, who had the resources and motivation to do this? The afternoon sun shifted, throwing different shadows across her desk as she methodically compiled her findings. She created a secure folder on her encrypted drive, documenting each anomaly she discovered. Years of military training had taught her the value of thorough documentation. By evening, she had filled 3 pages with notes and gathered dozens of screenshots showing irregularities in the evidence. She drove home in silence, her mind working through possibilities and consequences. In her modest apartment, Mara sat at her small kitchen table, spreading out her findings. Her dinner, a simple sandwich, sat untouched beside her. The wall clock ticked steadily as she reviewed everything again. Going public with her suspicions could be catastrophic. Veil Dynamics stock had just begun to stabilize. If she raised questions about the scandal now, it could trigger another market panic. And if someone had gone to such lengths to fabricate this evidence, they wouldn't hesitate to destroy anyone who threatened to expose them. She needed proof. Real, undeniable proof. And she needed to gather it quietly, without alerting whoever was behind this. Her military training kicked in as she began mentally mapping out an investigation strategy. Mara glanced at the cross hanging on her wall, saying a silent prayer for guidance. Then she gathered her notes into a folder and tucked it into her home safe. She would need to be careful, methodical, and above all, discreet. Opening her laptop, she began creating a secure timeline of events, marking each inconsistency she'd found. She would build her case slowly, gathering evidence piece by piece until she had enough to expose the truth, without risking everything Julian had worked to preserve. The night grew late as she worked, the city lights twinkling outside her window. Each new piece of evidence she logged strengthened her conviction that she was on the right track. But she knew this investigation would require patience and precision. One wrong move could bring everything crashing down. Camera flashes greeted Julian and Mara as they arrived at the downtown community food bank. Mara noticed Julian's slight hesitation before stepping out of the car, the way his shoulders tensed at the sight of reporters gathered outside. "Just focus on the work," she said quietly. "That's what matters today." He gave her a grateful nod as they walked inside. The food bank's director, Mrs. Chen, welcomed them with a warm smile and well-worn apron. "We're sorting donations and packing family boxes today," she explained, leading them to a long table stacked with canned goods. Mara rolled up her sleeves and got right to work, her military efficiency showing in how quickly she organized the cans by type. Julian watched her for a moment, then followed her lead. "The expired ones go in this bin," she showed him, demonstrating how to check dates. "And these family boxes need a balanced mix: proteins, vegetables, fruits, and grains." Their elbows bumped occasionally as they worked side by side. The first few times they both mumbled awkward apologies, but gradually they fell into a rhythm. Julian would sort the cans while Mara packed the boxes, their movements becoming more coordinated. "You've done this before," Julian observed, noticing how naturally she interacted with the other volunteers. "Every month since I was stationed here," she replied, carefully placing canned peaches in a box. "It helps me remember why I serve." A young mother approached their table with 2 small children. Mara's face softened as she knelt to their eye level. "Would you like to help?" she asked, showing them how to match similar cans together. Julian watched as she guided the children's small hands, teaching them with gentle patience. The younger child's face lit up when she praised his effort. It was a side of Mara he hadn't seen before. Warm, nurturing, completely present in the moment. Hours passed quickly as they worked. By late afternoon, they had helped pack over 200 family boxes. Their clothes were dusty, and Julian's expensive watch was smudged with box dirt, but neither seemed to mind. Later that evening, they sat across from each other at Julian's dining table. The formal setting felt strange after the day's manual labor, but the conversation flowed more easily than before. "Thank you for today," Julian said, studying his water glass. "I usually send donations, but being there, seeing the actual families..." He trailed off, searching for words. "It changes your perspective," Mara finished. She took a thoughtful bite of her salmon. "That's why I keep going back. It reminds me there's always someone who needs help, who matters more than my own problems." "Is that part of your faith?" Julian asked carefully. He'd noticed the small cross she always wore, the quiet prayers she said before meals. Mara considered his question. "My faith teaches service, yes, but it's more than that. It's about seeing the dignity in every person, treating them with respect no matter their circumstances. Like you did with those children today." She nodded. Everyone deserves to feel valued. Sometimes that means packing food boxes. Sometimes it's just taking time to listen. Julian was quiet for a moment. "I've spent years focused on building things, companies, products, profits. But watching you today, you build people up. That's different." "Different isn't always bad," Mara said softly. Their eyes met across the table, a moment of genuine understanding passing between them. They were still virtual strangers bound by an unusual agreement, but something had shifted. In the simple act of serving others together, they had found common ground. Mara's fingers hovered over her phone keyboard at 5:30 a.m. The sun hadn't risen yet, and her small apartment was quiet except for the gentle hum of her laptop. She took a deep breath and typed out a message to Sam Chen, her old cyber intelligence teammate from her deployment days. Need your expertise. Civilian matter? Sensitive? Coffee? The response came faster than expected. Corner booth. Joe's. 30 minutes. Joe's diner was nearly empty when Mara arrived, the morning regulars not yet filing in for breakfast. Sam sat in the farthest booth, his service-worn face partially hidden behind a steaming cup of coffee. His fingers tapped rapidly on his phone, likely running security checks out of habit. "Long time, Reyes," he said as she slid into the booth. "Saw you in the news." Mara ordered coffee from the sleepy waitress before pulling out her tablet. "That's related to why I'm here. I need your help tracing some files, Sam. Off the record." Sam's eyes narrowed. "The Vale scandal?" She nodded, keeping her voice low. "Something's not right with the timestamps on those leaked messages. The metadata doesn't match up." "Show me," Sam said, switching seamlessly into analysis mode. Mara pulled up the files she'd downloaded from news sites. "See these headers? The time signatures are inconsistent with the server logs. And here," she pointed to a string of code, "these routing patterns look artificial." Sam studied the screen, his coffee growing cold. "Could be spoofed," he muttered. "But this level of work, it's professional, military grade even. Can you trace it?" He glanced up. "Legally?" "Within bounds," Mara assured him. "I just need to know where these really came from." Sam rubbed his chin, considering. "Give me 12 hours. I'll run it through some old tools. Clean searches only, nothing that'll trigger flags." Back at her apartment, Mara paced while her laptop pinged with incoming data from Sam. She'd taken the day off from base duties, telling her CO she needed time to handle personal matters. It wasn't exactly a lie. Her phone buzzed around noon. A message from Sam. "Getting interesting. Call me." "The files bounced through servers in 3 countries, Sam explained when she called. "Professional misdirection, but there's a pattern in the packet routing." "What kind of pattern?" "Like breadcrumbs. Someone wanted these messages to look random, but they used the same encryption protocol each time. Military precision, corporate resources." Mara's throat tightened. "Can you trace it back?" "Working on it, but Mara—" Sam paused. "Whoever did this has serious backing. We're talking corporate-level infrastructure." She thought of the Vale Dynamics board meeting she'd read about, of Gavin Rourke's convenient timing. "Keep digging, Sam, please." Throughout the day, data trickled in. Sam sent her maps showing the message paths, network logs revealing hidden access points. By evening, her apartment walls were covered with printouts and sticky notes. At 11:47 p.m., her phone lit up with a final message from Sam. "Found shell accounts. Corporate registry numbers match holdings connected to Vale board members. Sending data now. Be careful, Reyes." Mara stared at her laptop screen as the files downloaded, her hand steady but her heart racing. The preliminary traces linked to offshore accounts, carefully hidden but not invisible. And at least 3 of them connected back to Vale Dynamics board members through subsidiary companies. Her suspicions had been right. The scandal hadn't just happened. It had been engineered. The fluorescent lights of the Veterans Support Center cast harsh shadows across tear-stained faces. Mara moved through the room with practiced grace, her uniform crisp despite the afternoon heat. News cameras tracked her movements as she sat beside a young woman clutching a folded flag. "I'm Jessica," the woman whispered, her fingers tracing the flag's edges. "My husband, he—" "Take your time," Mara said softly, placing a gentle hand on Jessica's shoulder. The cameras seemed to fade away as she focused on the grieving widow's face. Julian stood near the entrance, watching Mara work. She moved from family to family, offering quiet words and sincere embraces. There was no artifice in her actions, no awareness of the media presence capturing every moment. It gets easier, Mara told an elderly couple who had lost their son. Not better, but easier. And we're here to help carry that weight with you. A small boy tugged at her sleeve. Did you know my daddy? Mara knelt to his level, meeting his eyes. I didn't have that honor, but I know he was very brave, and he loved you very much. She pulled a small coin from her pocket, her unit's challenge coin, and pressed it into his tiny palm. This is to remember that you're part of our family now. We look after each other. Hours passed, and the cameras eventually departed. As the center emptied, Julian and Mara found themselves alone in the quiet room. He handed her a cup of water, noting the emotional exhaustion in her eyes. You do this often? He asked. Every month, she replied. It helps them, having someone who understands, and it helps me too. They walked to his car in comfortable silence. The drive to his penthouse was peaceful, the city lights twinkling against the darkening sky. In his living room, Julian poured them both tea. My father built Veil Dynamics from nothing, he said suddenly, but his real pride was in how he treated people. He believed in service above profit. Mara cradled her cup, steam rising between them. What happened to him? Cancer, 5 years ago. Julian's voice softened. His last words to me were about responsibility, not to the company, but to the people who depend on it. He sounds like a good man. He was. Julian studied her face. You understand that kind of loss, don't you? Mara set down her cup, her hands trembling slightly. David, she said quietly. My fiancé, 3 years ago in Kandahar. She touched the simple chain around her neck, where a ring hung hidden beneath her shirt. We were supposed to get married when he came home. Julian reached across the space between them, taking her hand. Not for the cameras, not for show, just one human being connecting with another's pain. I'm sorry, he said. Me too, she replied, squeezing his hand. About your father. They sat there in understanding silence. Two people who had lost pieces of their hearts, finding unexpected comfort in shared grief. The city hummed below, but in that moment they were just Mara and Julian. No cameras, no pretense, no tactical marriage. Just two souls recognizing the echoes of love and loss in each other. The basement archives of Veil Dynamics smelled of old paper and dust. Mara ran her finger along the spines of leather-bound ledgers, squinting in the dim light. She had come seeking the company's historical records of charitable work, hoping to understand more about the legacy Julian's father had left behind. A stack of boxes caught her attention, labeled Veterans Initiatives 1985 to 2005. She pulled them down carefully, settling at a small desk with her laptop open. The first folder revealed yellowed newspaper clippings, photographs of soldiers' families receiving checks, and carefully maintained spreadsheets. The Veil Family Support Fund, Mara read aloud, touching the elegant letterhead. She began sorting through the documents, piecing together the story. 20 years ago, Julian's father had established a private fund to help military families facing hardship. Medical bills, funeral expenses, children's education. The fund had covered it all, quietly and without fanfare. A photo slipped from between the pages. In it, a younger Thomas Veil stood with a group of veterans, his arm around a soldier in a wheelchair. The soldier's young family clustered close, their faces bright with relief and gratitude. On the back, someone had written, Thompson Family, Medical Care Funded, 1992. Mara's throat tightened. She recognized that name. Jason Thompson still volunteered at the Veterans Center, now helping other wounded warriors navigate their new lives. Her fingers trembled as she accessed the fund's current records on her laptop. The donations had dwindled after Thomas Veil's death, though the fund still existed. She thought of the grieving families she'd met 2 days ago, of the young widow, Jessica, and the little boy with his father's eyes. Hours passed as Mara dug deeper. She found handwritten notes from Thomas Vale, detailed plans for expanding the fund's reach, and letters of thanks from countless families. This wasn't corporate philanthropy. It was personal, passionate involvement in veterans' lives. The sound of footsteps made her look up. Julian stood in the doorway, his tie loosened after a long day of meetings. "The archives?" he asked, stepping inside. "What brought you down here?" Mara gestured to the spread of documents. "I found your father's Veterans Fund. I had no idea." Julian picked up the photograph, his expression softening. Dad believed in this. He used to say that taking care of soldiers' families was the least we could do for those who served. He set the photo down carefully. "The fund's still active, but it's smaller now. After he died, I got caught up in running the company." "It's still helping people," Mara said. She opened her laptop, showing him the current account. "Look." Julian leaned closer, then froze. "There's a new monthly donation," he said slowly, "starting right after our engagement." He looked at her. "Mara?" She met his eyes steadily. "The stipend you're paying me for this arrangement, I couldn't keep it. Not when I knew families like Jessica's needed help. I didn't know about your father's connection then. She gestured at the old records. "This is what service means. Your father understood that." Julian sank into a chair, staring at the documents scattered across the desk. The evidence of his father's legacy mingled with proof of Mara's quiet generosity. A bridge across time, connecting two people who believed in putting others first. "You've been donating everything?" he asked softly. "It felt right," she said simply. Mara's hands shook as she spread the documents across her kitchen table. Her cyber veteran friend, Mike Chen, had arrived at dawn with 2 thick folders and a encrypted USB drive. Steam rose from their untouched coffee cups as he walked her through his findings. "The timestamps were our first clue," Mike explained, pointing to a series of metadata printouts. "But what really caught my attention was the routing pattern." He slid over a complex diagram, showing digital pathways. "These messages allegedly from Julian's wife? They bounced through servers in 3 countries before reaching the press." Mara leaned closer, her military logistics training kicking in. "That's not amateur work." "Exactly." Mike pulled up another document. "But here's where it gets interesting. The shell companies paying for these servers? I traced their ownership through 6 layers of corporations." He tapped a name at the bottom of the paper. "All roads lead to Gavin Rourke." Mara's breath caught. She'd seen Rourke at board meetings, always watching Julian with that calculating smile. "We need absolute certainty, Mike. The company's stability depends on this. That's why I didn't come until now." He opened his laptop, revealing banking records and email chains. Rourke hired a cyber firm through his shell companies 3 months ago. The same firm's digital fingerprints are all over the faked messages. And here, he pointed to a transaction record, is the payment to the tabloid journalist who broke the story. Mara studied the evidence, her mind racing. The pieces fit together like a tactical map. Rourke had orchestrated the scandal, using Julian's wife as an unwitting pawn to destabilize both his marriage and his leadership. She reached for her phone, then hesitated. This information had to be handled carefully. One wrong move could send Vale Dynamics' stock into freefall, hurting thousands of employees and their families. Julian arrived 20 minutes later, his face tense. He stood silently as Mike walked through the evidence again, his knuckles white where he gripped the back of a chair. "My wife," he said finally. "She never—" "No," Mara said gently. "The messages were fabricated. The photos were edited. She was a target just like you." Julian sank into a chair, running a hand over his face. I should have known. Should have questioned it instead of reacting exactly as Rourke wanted. We can't change that now, Mara said firmly, but we can handle this right. They spent the next hour planning. Mike's evidence would go to federal regulators first, building a legal foundation. Then a carefully timed board meeting, with security present, and all escape routes covered. The stock will still take a hit when this comes out, Julian warned, studying the market projections they'd sketched. But not as bad as an uncontrolled crash, Mara pointed out. We time this right, get ahead of the story, protect the shareholders and employees first. Julian looked at her, something shifting in his expression. We? Someone has to watch your blind spots, she said simply. Now, let's talk about the board meeting strategy. They worked late into the night, mapping out every detail. Mike's evidence was organized into clear briefing folders. Regulatory contacts were lined up. Security plans were refined. Finally, Julian sat back, exhausted but focused. Tomorrow morning I'll call for an emergency board meeting. Rourke won't suspect anything until it's too late. Mara nodded, gathering the documents into her secure briefcase. They had a solid plan. Now they just had to execute it perfectly. The autumn sun warmed the courtyard of the Veterans Affairs building as Mara stood at the podium, her military posture perfect despite her nerves. Dozens of faces looked up at her expectantly. Veterans, press, and corporate representatives all gathered for the launch of Vale Dynamics' new logistics training program. When I served, she began, her voice steady and clear, I learned that victory often depends not on weapons, but on getting the right resources to the right place at the right time. She gestured to the veterans seated in the front row. That's what each of you learned too. And those skills, that expertise, shouldn't be lost when you return home. Julian stood to her left, watching with genuine admiration as she outlined the initiative. The program would provide veterans with advanced logistics certification and guaranteed interviews at Vale Dynamics distribution centers. It was Mara's idea, born from her own transition from military to civilian life. This isn't charity, she continued, making eye contact with the audience. This is smart business. Veterans bring discipline, problem-solving skills, and tested experience. They strengthen our workforce and our communities. The crowd nodded in agreement. A reporter raised her hand. Ms. Reyes, how did this initiative develop? Mara glanced at Julian, who stepped forward to join her at the podium. Their shoulders brushed lightly as he leaned toward the microphone. When Mara first proposed this program, he said, she showed me how veterans' military logistics experience could revolutionize our supply chain management. Her passion for serving others opened my eyes to new possibilities. The sincerity in his voice wasn't rehearsed. Several reporters scribbled notes, clearly struck by the natural warmth between them. After the formal presentation, Mara moved through the crowd, answering questions and connecting with fellow veterans. She noticed how Julian did the same, taking time to listen to each person's story. The cynical press narrative about their engagement had begun shifting to something more positive. You've really changed him, an older veteran commented, watching Julian crouch down to speak with a veteran in a wheelchair. He was always this person, Mara replied softly. He just needed reminding. The event concluded successfully, with several major companies pledging to join the initiative. As they walked to their separate cars, Julian touched Mara's elbow gently. Thank you, he said quietly. Not just for today, but for showing me how to lead with purpose again. Mara squeezed his hand briefly, then drove to St. Michael's Chapel. The small stone building stood peaceful in the fading light. Inside, the air was cool and still, scented with beeswax candles. She knelt in her usual pew, letting out a long breath. The weight of tomorrow's confrontation with the board pressed heavily on her mind, but here she found her center. Lord, she whispered, Guide our steps. Help us reveal the truth without causing unnecessary harm. Protect the innocent, the employees, their families, Julian's former wife. Give us wisdom to handle this properly." The chapel's silence wrapped around her like a comforting embrace. Soft evening light filtered through the stained glass, painting rainbow patterns on the worn wooden floors. Mara felt her shoulders relax as peace settled over her. She didn't pray for herself, though challenges lay ahead. Instead, she prayed for strength to serve others through the coming days. The mission was clear: expose corruption while protecting the vulnerable. In that clarity, she found certainty. The candles flickered as a gentle breeze swept through the chapel. Mara remained kneeling, her heart full of gratitude for this moment of tranquility and the purpose she'd found. Mara's phone buzzed incessantly on her nightstand, jolting her awake. The screen was filled with notifications, missed calls, text messages, and news alerts. Her stomach dropped as she opened the first article. "Veil Dynamics Scandal, the perfect setup." The headline screamed across her screen, accompanied by photos of her in uniform, at various military events, and even at the Veterans Gala where she'd first met Julian. Below them, bullet points laid out an intricate conspiracy theory. Former military intelligence officer infiltrates Veil Dynamics, calculated takedown of CEO's marriage, orchestrated romance to seize control. Questions about mysterious military operations. Mara's hands trembled as she scrolled through the article. They had twisted her military service into something sinister, painting her logistics expertise as covert operations training. Even her volunteer work at veterans' centers was portrayed as networking to gain influence. Her phone rang. "Julian. Have you seen it?" His voice was tight with tension. "Yes." Mara kept her voice steady, despite the churning in her stomach. "Julian, none of it's true." "I know that." He paused. "But the timing, they're trying to discredit you before we can present the evidence against Rourke." Mara dressed quickly, her movements mechanical. Outside her apartment, reporters had already gathered. She slipped out the back entrance, grateful for her military training and staying calm under pressure. The drive to Veil Dynamics felt surreal. Radio hosts debated her character, dissecting her past for signs of manipulation. Social media exploded with hashtags. Hashtag military mistress and hashtag Veil victim trended nationwide. Security escorted her through the building's side entrance. In Julian's office, the television played continuous coverage. Her own face stared back at her from every channel, her service photo displayed like a mugshot. "The board's called an emergency meeting," Julian said, loosening his tie. "They're voting on temporary suspension of my authority pending an investigation." Mara stood by the window, watching more reporters arrive outside. "They're portraying me as some kind of honey trap operative." Her voice cracked slightly. "Everything I've done to serve others, they're twisting it all." Julian's phone buzzed with an urgent message. "The vote's in." His face paled as he read. "Effective immediately, my executive powers are suspended. Gavin Rourke will serve as interim CEO." The office door opened. Gavin Rourke entered, flanked by security and legal representatives. "Julian, Mara." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm afraid I'll need you both to leave the premises. We'll be conducting a thorough investigation into these concerning allegations." Mara watched employees averting their eyes as they were escorted out. The same people who'd smiled and chatted with her yesterday now whispered behind their hands. Outside, camera flashes exploded as reporters spotted them. "Julian Veil and alleged operative removed from headquarters." The headline appeared on phones and tablets around them almost instantly. Social media erupted with fresh attacks, questioning everything from Mara's military record to her faith. The careful reputation they'd built over the past weeks crumbled in hours. In the parking garage, Julian slammed his car door in frustration. They planned this perfectly, right when we were ready to expose them. Mara sat in her own car, staring at her phone as messages poured in from veterans' organizations distancing themselves from her. The logistics training program she'd created was already being temporarily suspended pending review. One message caught her eye. From her pastor at St. Michael's Chapel. Remember Job. Stand firm in your truth. But as headlines continued to flash across her screen, and her phone buzzed with another cancellation from a veterans group, Mara felt the full weight of public condemnation crushing down on her shoulders. The sun was setting over the city skyline as Julian paced his home office, his silhouette casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. Mara sat quietly in a leather armchair, her military posture intact despite the exhaustion evident in her eyes. "We can end this now," Julian said, stopping to face her. "I'll make a statement, take full responsibility. Say I pressured you into this arrangement." His voice was heavy with defeat. "Your reputation shouldn't be destroyed because of me." Mara's hands tightened in her lap. That would be a lie. Sometimes a lie is kinder than the truth. Julian slumped into the chair behind his desk. "Look what they're doing to you. Everything you've built, your veterans programs, your military legacy, they're tearing it all apart." Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights began twinkling to life. Mara watched them, remembering all the nights she'd spent in war zones where darkness meant danger. But this darkness felt different, more insidious. "My sister called," she said quietly. "She's worried. Wants me to stay with her tonight." Mara stood, smoothing her simple black skirt. "And you're worried too. I can see it in your eyes, Julian. You're afraid." "Of course I'm afraid." His fist came down on the desk. "They're destroying you because of me, because I dragged you into this mess." "No." Mara's voice was firm. "I chose this. We both did. But I never thought they'd go after you like this. Military operative? Secret agent? They're making you sound like some kind of threat," Mara finished. "Because that's what truth is to people like Rourke. A threat." She walked to the window, pressing her hand against the cool glass. Below, news vans still circled the building like vultures. Her phone had been buzzing all day with cancellations. Speaking engagements, volunteer positions, committee seats. Years of careful work unraveling in hours. "You're trying to protect me," she said, turning back to Julian. "I understand that, but ending our marriage won't fix this. They'll just say it proves their theory, that I failed in my mission to take over your company." Her laugh was hollow. Julian's shoulders sagged. "Then what do we do?" "I need some time to think, to pray." Mara gathered her purse, her movements measured and controlled. "I'll stay with my sister tonight. At least let me have security drive you." "No." Mara's voice cracked slightly. I need to be alone right now." The drive to her sister's house was long and dark. Radio hosts dissected her character on every station. One called her the perfect soldier for a corporate coup. Another questioned whether her faith was just another calculated move. Mara pulled into her sister's driveway, sitting in the car for a moment. Julian's offer to end things echoed in her mind. He'd meant well, but his fear had hurt more than any headline. Fear that truth wasn't enough. Fear that doing right would cost too much. Her sister opened the front door, face creased with worry. Inside, away from cameras and accusations, Mara finally let her tears fall. Everything she believed in, integrity, service, faith, seemed so fragile in the face of power and greed. "Maybe I was naive," she whispered, clutching a cup of cooling tea. "Thinking goodness could survive in their world." Her sister squeezed her hand, but Mara barely felt it. She was lost in thoughts of all she'd seen, corruption winning, truth twisted, integrity mocked. And now Julian, ready to surrender to another lie just to make it stop. The night stretched dark around her sister's small house, and Mara had never felt more alone with her convictions. The pre-dawn air felt heavy as Julian sat in his father's old study, surrounded by stacks of yellowed letters. A single desk lamp cast a warm glow over the paper in his hands, his father's bold handwriting still clear after all these years. "Integrity isn't measured when things are easy, son," he read aloud, his voice barely a whisper. "It's measured in the moments when doing right costs you everything." Outside, the city slept beneath a blanket of stars. Julian reached for another letter, dated just months before his father's death. "The company isn't just about profits." The words seemed to speak directly to his heart. "It's about the people who trust us with their livelihoods, their futures. Never forget that trust is earned through truth, not convenience." Across town, in a small brick church with worn wooden pews, Mara knelt in prayer. The stained glass windows were still dark, but she knew every detail by heart. She'd spent countless Sunday mornings here as a child, learning about faith and courage. "Lord," she whispered, her voice echoing in the empty sanctuary, "show me the way forward." Her hands were clasped tightly, knuckles white with tension. "Help me understand if standing firm is pride or purpose." The familiar scent of old hymnals and wooden pews brought comfort as memories washed over her. Singing about standing strong in faith, learning stories of people who chose truth over safety. Her late fiancé had sat beside her in these very pews, both of them young and certain about right and wrong. Julian picked up another letter, this one water-stained and creased. "There will be days, Julian, when the easy path looks so tempting, days when compromise seems kinder than conviction. Those are the days that define us." He thought of Mara, of her quiet strength and unwavering moral compass. She'd never once suggested taking the easy way out, even when the attacks turned personal. His offer to end their marriage had been his fear speaking, not his integrity. In the church, the first hints of dawn began to color the stained glass. Mara remained kneeling, remembering her fiancé's last letter from overseas. "Some things are worth fighting for," he'd written. "Some truths are worth any price." She opened her eyes, looking up at the cross on the altar. The weight of uncertainty lifted from her shoulders as clarity settled in her heart. The truth about the company, about Julian's ex-wife, about Rourke's manipulation, it deserved to be told, whatever the cost. Julian stood, gathering the letters carefully. The sky was beginning to lighten, and his path forward felt clearer than it had in days. He needed to find Mara. She was already walking down the church steps when his car pulled up. Their eyes met through the window, and without a word, they both knew they'd reached the same conclusion. "I'm sorry about yesterday," Julian said as she slid into the passenger seat. "I was trying to protect you, but that's not what this is about," Mara finished. Her voice was steady, sure. "Is it?" "No." Julian pulled out his father's letters. "It's about truth, about doing what's right, even when it costs everything." Mara touched the worn paper gently. "Your father was a wise man. He would have liked you." Julian smiled slightly. "You remind me of him, always choosing the right path, not the easy one." "So we do this?" Mara asked. "We tell the truth, show the evidence about Rourke, whatever happens." Julian took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his father's legacy and Mara's strength beside him. "We do this, together." The morning sun broke over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of hope. They sat in comfortable silence, two people choosing truth over safety, integrity over convenience, ready to face whatever came next. Afternoon light streamed through the windows of Mara's small office as she methodically arranged the evidence files. Her desk was covered with printouts, data logs, and timeline charts, each piece carefully labeled and cross-referenced. "The timestamp anomalies are undeniable," she explained to Julian, who stood beside her desk, his suit jacket draped over a nearby chair. "See how these messages were supposedly sent at 3:47 p.m., but the metadata shows modification times from 2 days earlier?" Julian leaned in, squinting at the technical details. "Will the board understand all this?" "I've prepared a simplified presentation." Mara pulled up a clear, graphical timeline on her laptop. Even someone without technical background can see how the fake evidence was planted and traced back to Rourke's shell accounts. Julian nodded, then pulled out his phone. His fingers hovered over the screen for a moment before he started typing. "I'm calling for the emergency board meeting now. No more waiting." Mara watched as he composed the email, her heart beating steadily despite the stakes. The message was direct and professional, requesting an immediate session to address critical evidence regarding recent company events. "Send it," she said quietly when he hesitated. As Julian pressed send, his phone suddenly lit up with incoming calls. The board members were responding faster than expected. He stepped into the hallway to handle the calls, while Mara continued organizing the presentation. Through the glass partition, she could see him pacing, his gestures becoming more animated as he spoke. When he returned, his face was grim. "They're trying to limit attendance," he said, loosening his tie. "Rourke's allies want a small committee review first." Mara's military training kicked in. "They'll bury it, control the narrative before it reaches the full board." "Exactly." Julian ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every movement. "We need a way to make sure everyone sees the truth at once." Mara stared at her laptop screen, watching the cursor blink. Then her eyes widened. "What if everyone could see it? Not just the board, everyone." Julian looked at her questioningly. "We live-stream the board meeting," she explained, her voice gaining confidence. "Complete transparency, no closed doors, no private committees, no chance for manipulation." "Can we do that?" Julian asked, but she could see he was already considering it. "The company bylaws don't prohibit it," Mara said, pulling up the relevant document. "And in cases of suspected corporate malfeasance, shareholders have a right to direct information." Julian began to pace, energy returning to his steps. "If we announce the live stream just before the meeting starts—" "They won't have time to stop it," Mara finished, "and any attempt to shut it down will look suspicious." They spent the next hour setting up the technical details. Mara contacted her cyber veteran friend to handle the stream security, while Julian drafted a brief statement explaining their decision for transparency. As night fell outside the office windows, they sat side by side, reviewing their plan one final time. "Once we start this," Julian said softly, "there's no going back." Mara touched the cross at her neck, a habit from childhood. "Sometimes the only way forward is through the truth." Julian nodded, then reached for his phone to send the live stream announcement to all board members. "Tomorrow at 9 a.m. then." "Tomorrow at 9, Mara agreed, saving their presentation one final time. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the city lights twinkle through the windows, both knowing that the next day would change everything, for better or worse. The Veil Dynamics boardroom buzzed with tense energy as executives filed in, their usual confidence replaced by wary glances and hushed whispers. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the polished mahogany table. Mara stood near the presentation screen, her laptop connected and ready. She wore her most professional navy suit, a stark contrast to the flashier attire of the corporate elite surrounding her. The small cross at her neck caught the morning light, reminding her of her early prayers for strength. "The live stream is active," the IT specialist whispered, giving her a subtle thumbs up. 3 professional cameras had been set up around the room, their red lights blinking steadily. On a side screen, Mara could see the viewer count climbing rapidly. Shareholders, employees, and media all tuning in for what promised to be an unprecedented meeting. Julian entered last, his presence commanding immediate attention. He took his seat at the head of the table, maintaining the composure of a CEO despite the circumstances. Gavin Rourke sat opposite him, his usual smirk noticeably absent. "Before we begin," one of the senior board members started, "I must object to this public display. Corporate matters should be handled privately." "The time for privacy has passed," Julian interrupted, his voice firm but controlled. "When accusations go public, so should their resolution." Regulators from the SEC sat along one wall, their expressions neutral but alert. They'd arrived early, having received copies of the preliminary evidence the night before. Their notepads were already open, pens poised. Mara began organizing her presentation files as the board secretary read the meeting minutes. Her military training helped steady her hands as she clicked through her folders. Each piece of evidence was labeled clearly, ready to tell its part of the story. She glanced at the viewer count again. Over 10,000 now. Employees would be watching from their desks throughout the building. Shareholders would be following from their offices across the country. The truth would have witnesses. The room grew warmer as more people squeezed in. Junior executives lined the walls, while legal representatives consulted quietly with their clients. The air conditioning hummed unsuccessfully against the combined body heat and electronic equipment. "Ms. Reyes," Julian's voice cut through her thoughts. "Are you ready to begin?" Mara nodded, double-checking her first slide. The timeline she'd created was clear and damning. Even those without technical backgrounds would understand the manipulation that had occurred. She'd specifically designed each visual to be accessible to the average viewer while maintaining the technical accuracy the regulators would require. She felt Rourke's eyes on her, studying her for signs of weakness. Instead of avoiding his gaze, she met it directly, channeling the quiet strength that had carried her through war zones and loss. His eyes flickered away first. A message popped up on her laptop. The cybersecurity team confirming they were blocking multiple attempts to disrupt the live stream. They'd anticipated this and prepared accordingly. The truth would not be silenced by technical difficulties. Julian caught her eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod. They'd discussed this moment extensively, how to present the evidence in a way that would protect the company while exposing the fraud. The employees' jobs and retirement funds depended on them walking this line carefully. Mara took a deep breath and opened her presentation file. The room fell silent as the first slide appeared on the screen. Timeline of corporate communications analysis. Her hand rested on the laptop keyboard, ready to begin. The first irregularity appeared in the timestamp metadata of the leaked photos, Mara began, her voice clear and steady. The screen showed a technical breakdown that even the most digitally challenged board member could grasp. Notice how the creation dates precede the alleged affair by several weeks. Murmurs rippled through the boardroom. Julian remained perfectly still, his eyes fixed on the presentation while Gavin Rourke shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Furthermore, Mara continued, clicking to the next slide. The GPS data embedded in these images shows they were taken at locations that directly conflict with Mrs. Vale's documented travel schedule. She highlighted several dates where the former Mrs. Vale had been speaking at conferences across the country, while the photos claimed to show her at local hotels. One of the SEC regulators leaned forward, scribbling notes furiously. The live stream viewer count had now topped 20,000. But the most compelling evidence comes from the financial trails. Mara's next slide displayed a complex web of transactions. These shell companies, originally used to purchase the domain names where the photos first appeared, trace back to offshore accounts. She zoomed in on one particular transaction chain. This account, she paused, letting the information sink in, was accessed using corporate credentials assigned to Mr. Rourke's executive authentication token. The room erupted in gasps and whispers. Rourke's face drained of color as he started to rise from his chair. "That's preposterous," he sputtered, but his protest was cut short by one of the SEC regulators raising her hand. "Mr. Rourke, please remain seated," the regulator commanded. "Miss Reyes, continue." Mara nodded, bringing up the next piece of evidence. "We've also uncovered email communications between Mr. Rourke and several digital manipulation experts, dated weeks before the scandal broke. The emails appeared on screen, each one highlighted to show damning phrases about making it look real and timing the release. Two security officers quietly entered the boardroom, positioning themselves near Rourke's chair. The board members nearest to him instinctively shifted away. "Finally," Mara said, pulling up the last slide, "we have proof that Mr. Rourke personally orchestrated the purchase of Veil Dynamics shares through various proxy accounts, timed to profit from the stock's decline following the scandal." The lead SEC regulator stood up, her face stern. "Mr. Rourke, based on the evidence presented and our own independent verification, you're being detained for questioning regarding securities fraud, market manipulation, and corporate espionage." Rourke lunged to his feet, knocking his chair backward. "This is a setup. Veil's trying to frame me with his military puppet." "The evidence has been independently verified by 3 separate forensic teams," the regulator stated coldly. "Please come with us voluntarily, or these officers will assist you." The security officers moved forward, their presence leaving no room for argument. Rourke's shoulders slumped as the fight visibly drained from him. The room watched in stunned silence as he was escorted out, his footsteps echoing against the marble floors. The door closed behind them with a final sounding click, leaving the boardroom in shocked silence. The livestream counter showed over 50,000 viewers had witnessed Rourke's downfall. Julian's face remained composed, but Mara caught the slight tremor in his hands as he reached for his water glass. The lead regulator turned to address the remaining board members, her voice cutting through the tension. "This meeting will need to be temporarily suspended while we secure additional evidence and statements." The afternoon sun streamed through the windows of Veil Dynamics headquarters as employees gathered around monitors and smartphones, watching the company's stock price steadily climb. The nervous tension that had gripped the building for weeks was finally beginning to lift. In the break room, Sarah from accounting hugged her colleague, Tom, as they watched CNBC's breaking news coverage. Veil Dynamics vindicated, board members' manipulation scheme exposed, scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Julian sat in his office, methodically reviewing messages of support flooding in from industry leaders and longtime partners. His phone buzzed constantly with notifications from people who had distanced themselves during the scandal, now eager to reaffirm their connections. "The market's responding well," Mara said softly from the doorway. She wore the same simple navy suit she'd worn during the board meeting, but her shoulders seemed lighter now. Julian looked up, his eyes tired but clear. "Come in, please." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "The SEC team just left. They're expanding their investigation into Rourke's other business dealings." Mara sat down, smoothing her skirt. "I've been getting calls from veterans organizations all afternoon. They're relieved the truth came out." "Thanks to you," Julian said quietly. "Your logistics expertise saw what everyone else missed." "I just followed the data," Mara replied, her cheeks coloring slightly. "The patterns were there for anyone willing to look." Julian stood and walked to the window, watching the city below. "When I proposed this arrangement, I thought I was being clever, strategic." He turned back to face her. I saw you as a solution to a problem. We both agreed to the terms, Mara reminded him. Everything was clear from the start. That's just it, Julian said, moving back to his desk. Nothing was clear. I thought I needed a shield, someone to protect my position and the company. He picked up a framed photo of his father that sat on his desk. But what I found was someone who reminded me of everything my father tried to teach me about integrity. Mara watched him carefully. Your father would be proud of how you handled this. He would have adored you, Julian said softly, setting the photo down. Your dedication to service, your unwavering moral compass? He paused, meeting her eyes. The way you've changed how I see everything. The setting sun cast long shadows across the office as they sat in comfortable silence. Outside, the city hummed with evening traffic, but inside this space, time seemed to slow. The paperwork for dissolving our arrangement is ready, Mara said finally. Now that the crisis is over, we can end things cleanly, just as we planned. Julian's hand trembled slightly as he reached for the stack of papers on his desk. He looked at the dissolution agreement, then back at Mara. The woman he'd chosen for her reputation now meant more to him than any corporate strategy ever could. I don't want to sign these, he said quietly. Julian. This marriage was supposed to be a business arrangement, he continued, a temporary solution to protect the company. He set the papers down and looked at her with new clarity. But somewhere between the scandal and the truth, it became the most honest thing in my life. The last rays of sunlight painted the office in warm gold as they sat there, the unsigned dissolution papers between them, both understanding that what had started as a shield had transformed into something far more precious, a promise neither had expected to make. Morning dew sparkled on the roses in the quiet garden behind Vale Dynamics headquarters. The company's grounds crew had lovingly tended this space for decades, creating a peaceful sanctuary away from the corporate world above. Japanese maples cast dappled shadows across the stone path where Julian waited, his usual tailored suit replaced by casual slacks and a light sweater. The early hour meant they had the garden to themselves. Only the gentle splash of the stone fountain and distant bird songs broke the morning stillness. Julian's fingers traced the rough bark of a nearby cherry tree, its spring blossoms just beginning to unfurl. He heard soft footsteps on the gravel path and turned to see Mara approaching. She wore a simple sundress, her dark hair loose around her shoulders instead of its usual practical bun. The morning light caught the silver cross she always wore, making it gleam. "This is beautiful," she said, taking in the carefully tended flower beds and winding paths. "I had no idea this was here." "My father created it," Julian explained, falling into step beside her. "He said every corporate tower needs a place where people can remember what matters beyond balance sheets and stock prices." They walked in comfortable silence, passing beneath an arbor draped with climbing roses. The morning air was cool and sweet with their fragrance. "Mara." Julian stopped beside the fountain, its peaceful sounds creating a gentle backdrop. "I asked you to meet me here because this place has always helped me think clearly." She turned to face him, her expression open but careful. "About the dissolution papers?" "Yes." He took a deep breath. "I meant what I said yesterday. I don't want to sign them." "Julian, we agreed." "I know what we agreed," he said gently. "We made a practical arrangement with clear terms. But something happened that wasn't in any of our carefully worded contracts." A robin landed on the fountain's edge, tilting its head to watch them before dipping its beak into the water. "When everything was falling apart," Julian continued, "you didn't just protect my position or the company. You showed me what real integrity looks like, not as a strategy, but as a way of life." Mara's hands clasped her cross, a gesture he'd come to recognize as her way of centering herself. You don't owe me anything. This isn't about owing. Julian stepped closer, his voice soft but certain. It's about choosing. For the first time since this began, I'm not making a tactical decision or following a careful plan. He reached for her hand, his touch gentle. Mara Reyes, I'm asking you to stay. Not as part of any arrangement, but as my wife. For real this time. For life. The fountain murmured behind them as morning light filled the garden. A slight breeze stirred the cherry blossoms, sending a few pale petals drifting around them. This isn't because of yesterday's victory? She asked quietly. No, Julian smiled. It's because of 100 small moments. It's because you donate your stipend to help veterans' families. Because you pray even when you're afraid. Because you taught me that doing the right thing isn't a business strategy. It's a sacred trust. Mara looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I never expected this. Neither did I, Julian admitted, but I've never been more certain of anything. The garden waited, peaceful and patient, as Mara took both his hands in hers. Her voice was soft but clear as she answered. Yes. They stood together in the morning light, surrounded by the garden's quiet beauty, both understanding that what had begun as a calculated arrangement had transformed into something far more precious, a covenant made in perfect freedom, wrapped in the weight and wonder of true promise. The cafe was nearly empty when Julian arrived, just as Rebecca had requested. 2 days had passed since his proposal to Mara in the garden, and this meeting was long overdue. His former wife sat at a corner table, stirring her tea with measured movements. She looked tired but composed, her professional armor firmly in place. Thank you for meeting me, Julian said, taking the seat across from her. Rebecca's fingers tightened around her cup. I almost didn't come. I would have understood. He placed a manila envelope on the table between them. These are the original photos and messages that Rourke's team fabricated. The regulators have copies, but I thought you should have them too. She didn't touch the envelope, but her shoulders relaxed slightly. I saw the news about Rourke. What he did to you, to us. Julian shook his head. I should have questioned it. Should have talked to you before believing the worst. Yes, you should have. Rebecca's voice was steady, but pain flickered in her eyes. 15 years of marriage, Julian, and you didn't even ask for my side of the story. The truth of it settled heavily between them. Outside, afternoon sunlight painted patterns on the cafe floor through gauzy curtains. A barista quietly wiped down the counter, giving them space. I was wrong, Julian said simply. I let my fear of betrayal and public humiliation override everything we'd built together. You deserved better than that. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, her tea growing cold. We weren't perfect, even before this. Both of us put the company first too often. That's true. Julian thought of all the missed dinners, the postponed vacations, the conversations about children that never went anywhere. But that doesn't excuse how I handled this. No, it doesn't. She finally reached for the envelope, her movements deliberate. But thank you for telling me the truth now, for clearing my name. It was the least I could do. Julian paused, choosing his next words carefully. I hope you find happiness, Rebecca. Real happiness, not just success. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. I heard about your engagement, the real one, this time. Yes. She seems like someone who knows what matters. Rebecca stood, gathering her purse and the envelope. Don't make the same mistakes with her. Julian nodded, understanding the grace being offered in those words. They said goodbye without touching, but something tight and poisonous had dissolved between them. Later that night, Julian knelt beside his bed where Mara was already praying. The bedroom was quiet, except for the soft whisper of their voices. Her hand found his as they thanked God for truth's victory over deception, for healing instead of bitterness. Lord, Mara prayed softly, thank you for showing us that redemption is stronger than revenge. Julian squeezed her hand, adding his own silent gratitude for second chances and the wisdom to recognize them. They remained there together, wrapped in peaceful certainty that love built on truth could withstand any storm. Camera flashes lit up the Vale Dynamics lobby like lightning strikes. The newly installed foundation plaque gleamed on the wall. The Thomas Vale Veterans Foundation, its bronze surface catching the morning light. Reporters and guests filled every available space, their murmurs echoing off the marble floors. Mara stood beside Julian at the podium, her army dress uniform crisp and precise. Her hands were steady as she adjusted the microphone, though her heart raced with the weight of the moment. This wasn't about publicity or image repair. This was about fulfilling a promise to those who served. My father believed that true leadership meant lifting others up, Julian began, his voice carrying clearly through the speakers. He understood that our veterans deserve more than words. They deserve action, support, and opportunities to continue their service in new ways. Mara watched the crowd, noting the mix of business suits and military uniforms. In the front row, several veterans from her old unit sat straight-backed and attentive. They had been among the first to volunteer for the Foundation's pilot programs. Julian turned slightly, gesturing to Mara. That's why I'm proud to announce that Major Mara Reyes will serve as the Foundation's executive director. Her experience in military logistics and her dedication to service make her the perfect choice to carry forward my father's vision. Stepping to the microphone, Mara felt the familiar calm that came with having a clear mission. The Thomas Vale Veterans Foundation will focus on 3 key areas, she explained. First, transitional support for veterans entering civilian careers. Second, specialized logistics training programs. And third, family support services for active duty and veteran households. As she outlined the specifics, Mara noticed tears in the eyes of a young woman holding a toddler. She recognized her from the base, a widow whose husband had served under Mara's command. This was why the Foundation mattered. The morning transitioned into an afternoon outreach event in the building's community center. Tables lined the walls with information about job training, counseling services, and educational opportunities. Veterans mixed with corporate mentors, sharing stories and exchanging contact information. Major Reyes? A sergeant with a prosthetic leg approached her. I just wanted to say, this logistics program you're setting up? It's exactly what I've been looking for. A way to use my skills again, you know? Mara smiled warmly. That's exactly what we want to provide, Sergeant. Your experience is valuable. We just need to help employers see that. Across the room, Julian was deep in conversation with a group of veterans' spouses, listening intently as they described the challenges of frequent moves and interrupted careers. He caught Mara's eye and nodded slightly, understanding passing between them. A retired colonel who had served with Mara's fiancé approached the podium, tapping the microphone. The room quieted. I've seen a lot of programs come and go, he said gruffly. But this feels different, because it's being led by one of our own, someone who understands both worlds. Workers from Vale Dynamics circulated with refreshments, many staying to talk with the veterans about potential positions. The atmosphere was charged with possibility rather than charity, with dignity rather than pity. Near one of the resource tables, a young veteran was explaining military supply chain management to an interested HR director. 2 tables over, a Gold Star mother hugged another woman who had just lost her son, sharing the kind of understanding that only comes from walking the same difficult path. Mara moved through the crowd, answering questions and making connections. This was what she had trained for, in a way she had never expected. Not just moving supplies and coordinating operations, but building bridges between communities that needed each other. The afternoon light slanted through the windows as more stories were shared, more hands clasped, more hope kindled. The foundation wasn't just a name on a wall. It was becoming a living legacy of service. Morning sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows of St. Michael's Chapel, painting rainbow patterns across the wooden pews. The small church, barely able to hold 100 people, was filled to capacity with veterans, Vail Dynamics employees, and families who had become part of their journey. Mara stood in the chapel's side room, smoothing her simple white dress. Unlike the rushed ceremony that had started their arrangement, this moment felt sacred and true. Her sister Sarah helped adjust her veil, careful not to disturb the single white rose tucked into Mara's dark hair. "You're glowing," Sarah whispered, squeezing her hand. "Real love looks good on you." Through the door, Mara could hear the gentle murmur of conversations and the soft prelude music floating from the organ. Colonel Matthews, her former commanding officer, waited outside to walk her down the aisle, a bitter-sweet honor that would have belonged to her father. In another room, Julian straightened his tie, his hands steady but his heart full. This wasn't about appearances or business strategies anymore. The man who had once proposed a tactical marriage now understood the deeper meaning of partnership. The chapel bells chimed 9, their clear tones calling everyone to attention. As the organ began playing Amazing Grace, the guests rose. Veterans in dress uniforms stood alongside executives in suits, while children from the Foundation's family programs scattered rose petals down the aisle. Colonel Matthews offered his arm to Mara. "Ready, Major?" She nodded, her voice steady. "Ready, sir." The wooden doors opened, and Mara felt her breath catch. Sunlight streamed through the rose window above the altar, illuminating Julian's face as he waited for her. His eyes held none of the guarded calculation from their first ceremony, only joy and certainty. They had chosen to write their own vows, words born from the truth of their journey, rather than tradition alone. As Mara reached the altar, Julian took her hands in his, their fingers intertwining naturally. "I, Julian, choose you, Mara," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed chapel. "Not for advantage or appearance, but for the light of integrity you bring to every day. I promise to honor your faith, support your service to others, and walk beside you in truth and love." Tears glistened in Mara's eyes, but her voice remained strong. "I, Mara, choose you, Julian, not from duty or obligation, but for the goodness I've discovered in your heart. I promise to stand with you in challenges, celebrate your generosity, and share a life guided by faith and compassion." The pastor stepped forward, his weathered face kind. "These vows are not just promises between two people, but a commitment to serve others together. Through the foundation you've built, the lives you've touched, and the example you set, your marriage becomes a blessing to many." Sunlight shifted through the stained glass, casting warm colors across the gathered faces. In the front pew, a young widow held her children close, while beside her, a veteran who had found new purpose through their programs smiled encouragingly. As they exchanged rings, simple bands that symbolized an unbroken circle of faith and service, the chapel filled with a sense of rightness. This wasn't an ending, but a beginning built on the strongest foundation: truth, integrity, and a shared calling to serve. The pastor raised his hands in blessing. What began as an arrangement has been transformed by grace into true partnership. Today, we witness not just the renewal of marriage vows, but the celebration of two hearts united in service to others.